Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Empower Sounds podcast. My name is Mahika, and today I'm joined by the wonderful Nidhi Sethi, founder of Behind the Smiles, a movement dedicated to bringing awareness around neurodiversity, especially for women with autism and ADHD, as that's Nidhi's personal experience. On today's episode, we talk about Nidhi navigating her life as an autistic woman with all the demands of being a medic, going to university, being a runner, training for the London Marathon, and everything in between. I hope that this episode is informative and inclusive, and that you learn and that you laugh and that you enjoy. Let me know what you think on the podcast Instagram at Empower Sounds. Please rate and review the show, and let's get started. Awesome. Well, welcome, Nidhi. Can you please start by introducing yourself and telling us all about your journey?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. My name's Nidhi and I'm 21 years old. And when I was 17, I was diagnosed as autistic. Um, Surprisingly, my journey starts long before then. So at the age of 2, I was diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. And from a young age, I struggled just with daily life, whether it would be trying to socialize and make friends at school, or getting ready and dealing with difficulties putting clothes on, with labels and all sorts of things like that. And as I got older, I found that these challenges got more extreme. And so in secondary school during GCSEs, my mental health fluctuated quite a lot. Um, and when I got to A levels, it was lockdown, and I decided to reach out to the school counselors for some help. And speaking to the school counselors about all the things that were going through my head, they referred me to an educational psychologist where I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Um, and when I was diagnosed with this, I'm not going to lie, I was completely like, I didn't really know what to do with this information. My mum's a doctor. She didn't really know what to do with the piece of information. And so I kind of took to social media and to the internet to see what was out there. I started searching intently and I came across all this research about autism and how it presents in females compared to males. Now, when most of us think of autism, we think of a male who rocks back and forth, is probably non-verbal, doesn't really speak much. But in reality, the people that know me, that's very different from who I am. And online, most of the information out there was scientific articles, and it wasn't anything very helpful. And so one day I was feeling particularly brave, and I took to my computer and I just wrote down everything I wanted my family to know about who I was and what being autistic meant to me. Um, and so I showed it to my parents, and next thing you know, typical parent, like crying, going, "Oh my God, like, I can't believe this is how you felt." And they were like, "You really need to do something with this." And so I went back to school and showed them what I'd come up with. And from there, it kind of really took off. I kind of saw the impact of what I was doing and like how it could touch people kind of on different walks of life. And that's kind of how my blog and my website started. And now here we are.
Wow, what a journey. Thank you for sharing that with us. There's so many things that I want to unpack. I think I'm going to start by asking you about your diagnosis process. And I want to ask, how did you handle societal perceptions and stereotypes about autism, like before getting your diagnosis and after? Because, like you said, you took to social media because you didn't really know what to do with the information. So, how did it kind of change your relationship with what autism actually is, and how did you feel about your sense of self once you received the diagnosis?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, when you think of autism, you think of a boy, you think of someone nonverbal, and that's kind of all I really knew of it. I'd never really properly looked into it or anything like that. But going onto social media, it was actually TikTok that helped lead to my diagnosis. And I watched this video of a girl who was talking about like 5 different signs of autism in girls. And I watched it, and it was the way it introduced was it just started speaking about these five things, and at the end it was like, if you think these are you, you could be autistic. And I watched it and I was like, oh my God, this is me, and it's terrifying. Um, and I think the way my brain works is I'm quite like a black and white person. And so leading up to my diagnosis and even getting my diagnosis, I don't think there was a huge part of me that was like, what are people going to think? It was more about myself, like, what can I learn from this? Like, I think I struggled so much growing up, just not understanding who I was or where I belonged. And so this was almost like a lifeline. Like, I felt it was finally me finding like a belonging and like a purpose almost.
That's really beautiful. And it's really nice to hear how it really actually helped you understand your sense of self. Did it impact your relationships? Like you said, you started writing down your feelings and you shared it with your family. But apart from your family and your friends, like, did it impact your social interactions? And have there been any surprising or positive outcomes in the kind of discussions you had post-diagnosis?
Yeah, 100%. I think my parents were probably more nervous about um, not talking about it, but telling people about it. I think there is a lot of stigma there. For me, it was very much like, this is who I am. And if people can't accept me for who I am, then they're not the people that should be in my life. And I did come across people that were like, you don't look autistic, whatever that means. But for me, it was very much like, it's not them trying to be rude in any way. It's more that they just don't have the information. Um, and the knowledge to respond in maybe more of an empathic way. But like you said, I think I was actually greeted with a lot of like open-minded individuals. I mean, I remember my mum telling like parents from school, me telling friends, and they'd come back days later with like research and questions, and I just loved how people just wanted to understand me more. I think it kind of made me realize how amazing people can be. Just people being so open and wanting to learn as much as possible.
That's really beautiful, and it's really like encouraging to hear that, especially because there's so much information out there about this kind of lost generation, speaking as to gender differences in how neurodivergence kind of manifests, and how there's so many women that haven't been diagnosed and are starting to be diagnosed, and now how these conversations about neurodiversity and mental health are starting to come into kind of daily life. So that's really nice. I want to ask you more about, you said you got diagnosed at 17. Like, although that's not super, super late, it's still pretty late. And how do you feel about the fact that it took 17 years to kind of get to that point? Like, do you feel any resentment about it, or do you feel grateful that you managed to get the diagnosis, or do you wish it happened earlier? Do you have any thoughts on the when of the whole kind of question?
Yeah. Um, my outlook on life is very much everything happens for a reason. And I very much believe that getting my diagnosis at 17 was probably the best thing that happened to me for lots of reasons. I think if I had had a diagnosis at a younger age, whether, it's an easy conversation to be had or not, and I've reflected on this a lot, I think my life would be very different to some extent. I think there's so much stigma that does come with being autistic, whether it's that autistic people aren't super sporty or they have a lack of coordination. And I guess never really being told that because I hadn't got my diagnosis, I pushed myself further than I ever thought I possibly could. And when I was born premature, and I always got told, you'd never be sporty, you'd never be this. And my whole outlook on life is just resilience and pushing through and defying obstacles. And I was fortunate enough to represent the UAE where I lived playing netball. And I've had all these opportunities that I don't necessarily think I would have had if I'd got my diagnosis from a young age. Not because I would have stopped myself or my parents would, but I think society does label you and that label does stick with you. Um, at the same time, I would say that getting a diagnosis at the age of 17 is actually quite young for females, as sad as it may be. There are females, especially in the UK with the NHS and waiting times, that wait years and years that get their diagnosis when they're in their 40s and their 50s. And so to be able to have a diagnosis at the age of 17, I feel really, really honoured and lucky.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to dive more into the whole gender differences and diagnosis and the way it manifests. But before we do you have any advice for anyone who suspects that they might be on the spectrum but hasn't pursued a diagnosis yet? Just like the way that you had when you saw that girl on TikTok.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because there is so much stigma out there. But I would honestly say that don't be afraid. As weird as that sounds, we're moving into an age where I think neurodiversity is celebrated, and I think it should be. And so getting a diagnosis really did change and save my life. And so, yeah, I think there's such a big community out there. There's so many people that are willing to share their story and be open. And so, yeah, just don't be afraid.
That's amazing advice. Now, you wrote a really in detailed article on your blog about the gender differences between men and women in autism, but can you please tell us a little bit more for people who don't know and how it really impacts our understanding of what autism is? And again, linking back to diagnosis, but also like coping and anxiety and just kind of social interactions.
Yeah, of course. This is a massive topic, but I'll try and summarize it as well as possible. So, when autism was first kind of established, it was said to be an extreme form of the male brain. And so, studies were undertaken into understanding how these so-called extreme male brains in boys were, and mainly white boys. And so, all this research was done into how the symptoms present, what the characteristics are. And so the diagnosis of males to females was significantly higher with males than it was with females. I mean, if you take males and females, just scientifically, we have different chromosomes. We're made up of completely different characteristics to some extent. And so, understandably, this research was very specific for males, but not so for females. If we look at the characteristics, one of the main ones, not to generalize, but to generalize, would be social interactions. Now, boys that are autistic are a lot more introverted. They feel less of a need to fit in and socialize, whereas autistic girls are quite the opposite. They're normally quite extroverted. They want to fit in, and they do this by something called masking. Um, and now masking is copying and mimicking characteristics that you see other people your age doing. So for girls, this is one of the reasons that you can get a late diagnosis. So for me personally, as a young child, I was super extroverted. I was very loud, very smiley, always wanted to try and be in the action and make friends. And this was actually because I was trying to fit in with other girls my age. And so when we're talking about boys versus girls with who are autistic, it's very much about them presenting differently. And we're lucky enough to kind of have realized this. And recently, we've seen as the research for autism in females has grown so much that actually the ratio of males to females with autism has completely diminished. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And linking back to what you were saying about masking, I wanted to ask about the name of your blog post in the first place, Behind the Smiles. I'm guessing that is like it alludes to masking and how there's so much behind kind of the smile and how the mask you wear isn't always exactly a reflection of how you feel and who you are. And you wrote a really beautiful article about that. So can you please tell everyone a little bit more about your smile?
Yeah. So from a young age, my parents always used to say that whether it was my school report cards or parents' meetings or even strangers I used to see on the street, I always would have the biggest smile. Um, but this kind of also did get me in trouble a lot as well. Whether it would be me getting in trouble, which didn't necessarily happen very often, or dealing with a situation when I was comforting a friend or I was upset, this smile would actually get bigger. And after my diagnosis, I realized that this was actually one of my coping mechanisms. And I used my smile like a mask to hide behind. And so, whatever the emotion I was feeling, I would always be smiling. And in fact, if it was anxiety or stress or sadness, this smile would only get bigger. And so, when it came to coming up with a title for my blog, it almost felt natural to name it Behind the Smiles, um, due to my smile being my trademark, but also the realization that there's so much behind everyone's mask and behind everyone's smile, and you don't know what's going on in everyone's life.
For sure. And I think touching on that, masking can be really emotionally and mentally exhausting because you're kind of showing one thing and feeling one thing and then having to deal with the reactions of everyone's perceptions of your reactions to other things. So, do you have any strategies that you use to kind of avoid emotional burnout associated with like constant and chronic masking?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think my biggest tip, and it's something that definitely takes time to learn and feel comfortable doing, but is being able to say no. It's a two-letter word and probably one of the simplest words in the English dictionary, but also one of the hardest to say sometimes. And it's learning to put yourself first and to be able to say no. If you don't want to go out, you don't feel like it, being able to say no. It's if you're feeling tired and you need a day in, to be able to do that, to be able to put yourself first and realize this world is crazy. There's always stuff going on, and there's always times where, you're going to be tired when you're not feeling up to it. And that's absolutely okay. Like, there is no pressure on any of it. And so, yeah, I think the new word in my vocabulary really is no.
It's such an important word, and I agree with you that it's one word, but it's a full sentence, and it really carries a lot of meaning in not only our relationships with others, but with ourselves. But I think that the way that we're conditioned, especially as women, is to feel kind of guilt when we express our boundaries and we say no. So
Mhm.
do you have any advice on kind of overcoming that sense of guilt and feeling like you can say no? Not just to other people, but like when you sit with yourself and you're like, no, and like kind of feeling okay and safe in that sensation.
Yeah, I think it's a really challenging one, actually. It's something that I've always struggled with. In terms of how to overcome it, I think it really is practice. Um, it's hard. It is hard. And I think being a girl, like, there's that extra pressure, there's that extra stigma. And so in terms of like learning to be with yourself and just to allow yourself to rest, I think the way that I started doing this was more like baby steps almost. So let's say you're meant to be going out to a party and you don't feel like going. Instead of saying no to going, maybe go for an hour, maybe go for half an hour, maybe see how you feel. Don't put as much pressure on it. If you're meant to be meeting up with friends, let them know that, okay, I'm feeling a bit tired today. Maybe we can, sit in a room together, watch some Netflix, do a bit less talking. I think it's about baby steps and becoming comfortable with breaking down those barriers and being comfortable saying no.
Yeah, 100%. Especially also, it's important to realize that when you're learning to set boundaries, there's people in your life that aren't used to you having boundaries. And so it comes as a shock because it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a change. So it's not that you're a bad person, but it's that it's new behavior and that takes time to kind of recalibrate and adjust to. My next question for you was, have there been more instances, like you just said, about baby steps where you've consciously decided to kind of break the mask and be more authentic, not just about your neurodiversity, but how you feel and how not everything is always smiley and cheery? And what were the outcomes of those circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's hard because I got my diagnosis after 17 years, and whilst it is early, it's very hard to unlearn patterns after 17 years. It's never going to happen overnight, but it's learning to be more comfortable with yourself. And I think I'm a lot more open now about my boundaries and things that I struggle with, things that I feel comfortable with. Whether it's me saying, right, this place is too noisy, like, can we go somewhere else and sit and have a coffee? Whether it's the lights being too bright and me asking someone, oh, would you mind dimming the lights? Whether it's going to a restaurant and not being afraid to say, actually, could I please get everything on the side of my burger? Um, I think it's just learning to be more comfortable with myself and realizing the people that love you and the people that are there to support you won't judge you for who you are.
100%. I think that's really, really applicable advice for everyone, regardless of whether they struggle with autism or any form of neurodiversity. Really just realizing that there's so much courage in kind of standing up for what you need. Um, and my next question for you is asking about, we were just talking about the gender differences, but I want to bring
Mhm.
intersectionality into it. Like, um, we're both South Asian women, and you said that you grew up in the UAE. So there's also this element of race and ethnicity. And I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, I think that um, the South Asian community is still kind of getting there in terms of conversations about neurodiversity and mental health, like having conversations with extended family about like conditions of like what does that even mean? Like what has been your experience with navigating um not only being an autistic woman but being an autistic woman of color?
Yeah, I think if I'm being completely honest, I've been very privileged. I've grown up with a family that's super accepting, that really just want the best for me, whether it's my grandparents, my parents, my cousins. Um, I think I've been very lucky with the fact that they are willing to listen and try and adapt and try and work with me. And I know that's not the case for so many autistic people of color, both women and males. Um, but like I said, I've been very fortunate and I wouldn't say I've struggled in many ways, which I think is quite a unique experience. And I think actually living in the UAE probably was a massive part of that. The UAE is a huge multicultural society. You grow up with people from all walks of life. And I think from a young age, being in that environment, you're so used to it that it's kind of like ingrained in you that diversity, that collaboration, that community.
Yeah, for sure. I get that. Um, but even if someone's like not try if people aren't trying to be malicious or exclusionary, again, not everyone comes from a extremely diverse background. So what advice would you give
Mhm.
to other people of color that are either diagnosed or think that they might have autism or are struggling with other neurodiversity that don't have the vocabulary to kind of explain to the
Mhm.
people in their life what they're going through and what like their condition is because it's not really kind of part of everyday conversations.
Yeah, no, I completely appreciate that. And I think um for me it was explaining to people that I wasn't any different. It was trying to make people understand that being autistic was actually who I am. It's just you understanding yourself better. And when you phrase it like that, I think people are a lot more willing to understand and listen. Um, Being open and honest about the challenges you face, but how it doesn't change who you are. You're still the exact same person. You're still where you're meant to be, doing what you're meant to be. I think is a massive part of that. And through my blogs, I've really tried to be as like open and honest and raw as possible because I think when you allow yourself to be completely transparent, it allows people to be more open-minded and willing to listen. But I know it's a difficult one, and I know that people of color do face more challenges 100%.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I urge anyone who's listening that is going through this to read your blog. I will link it down below, because it's really like not only inspiring, but it's also really educational in the way that it's kind of set out. I wanted to ask you also, we were just talking about your experiences with the diversity of the UAE and growing up, but you moved to London for university. And
Mhm.
I want to now talk to you about navigating university with autism and all the things that come with it. So, can you please talk to us about the specific challenges that you faced in terms of socializing and managing workload and avoiding burnout? How has it been for you doing university?
Yeah, so I think to begin with, I was really looking forward to going to university. As much as it can be a daunting experience and moving to a different country, for me, it kind of worked out at a very good time. I just received my diagnosis, and with this new information, if you will, I thought it would be the best time to kind of start afresh. Um, and so I came to uni quite apprehensive, but with an open mind and trying to just be me and as much me as possible. And I think I found it difficult initially, like you said, like I said, sorry, earlier, with saying no and being able to set boundaries. And it's just about doing what you feel comfortable with. I think with anyone going to university, it's important to remember that we're all in the same boat. We're all in a new situation with new people. And so just not putting any expectations on yourself, whether it was, living alone can be a big thing, learning to cook for yourself. And there are sensory challenges that come with this. Whether it's actually handling foods, cleaning your kitchen, cleaning your bedroom. I think that was something that I definitely had to learn how to do. I'm not sure if neurotypical people would say the same, but I think that was also a big challenge that I hadn't really thought of. I'd mainly focused on, how I was going to cope socially. But living day to day, like there are challenges. Another thing I struggle with, which probably affects my life more than anything else, I'm surprised I haven't brought it up yet, um, is time blindness. Now, time blindness is quite a new term, but it's effectively where you have a lack of understanding of time. So, time doesn't really mean much to me. I could sit in a room for an hour, 5 minutes, 2 days, and it will feel the exact same. And so, trying to plan my days, whether it was what time I'm going to lectures, how I'm going to get there, navigating public transport, um, that was very challenging. It took trial and error. It took a huge support network. Whether it was my parents zooming them, or my brother or my sister, or any close friends, and just being honest about, okay, so if I need to be at my lecture at 10:30, what time do I need to get up? Do I need to set an alarm? How am I going to get to uni? I need to figure out where I'm going to go. I think there's so many aspects which you don't necessarily think of when you're neurotypical. So it was challenging, but I think it's definitely something that you learn to adapt with. And building a routine can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And with this time blindness thing and the sensory issues, how did you find, because you, like you said, you've talked about the support system that you had in the UAE, but what was it like coming to a new environment and having to deal with all these new challenges whilst also building a new support system and new friendships and also navigating kind of social difficulties? Did you find it hard? And um, did it test you in your ability to kind of take care of yourself and really like be there for yourself when you're going through struggles whilst you were making those like initial friendships?
Yeah, 100%. I think building a new support network was super challenging. I mean, being in the UK, we have the NHS, and it's an incredible system, but it also has its challenges, and trying to navigate that independently, I found difficult, whether it was, you know, explaining my diagnosis to the doctors, getting them all the paperwork that they needed, going through university support systems to access the extra time in exams, and having accommodation which was close to university if I had days where I struggled with burnout, or whatever it may be. So I think it was really difficult. And being completely honest, in first year, my mental health did really struggle. Um, I was fortunate enough to, we're really lucky in this day and age to have things like Zoom and WhatsApp calling. And so to be able to have my support system in Dubai, so my family, whilst being in the UK, I don't think I would have got through. Um, Without them. And being completely honest, I ended up on anti-anxiety meds and antidepressants. And it was a difficult time. But I think the important thing to remember is that it does get better and it does get easier. I think for all of us, having a new system, a new environment is really difficult. It's that fear of the unknown. And so, yeah, I think that was definitely challenging.
Yeah, 100%. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing about your anxiety. On your blog, you said that over 70% of autistic individuals suffer from mental health problems. And that is such a large figure. And also anxiety is something that's just so part and parcel of like university life and everything. So aside from your medication, what other coping strategies or advice do you have for people that either don't have the resources or aren't like ready to go on medication but want to kind of manage their symptoms of anxiety and kind of avoid burnout?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that medication is never the first line option. And for me, the thing that helps me more than anything else is having an outlet. And for me, in first year, that was playing netball. I joined netball at university, having played at school and from a young age, and being able to have that form of release, not having to think about what you got to do when you go home, your washing and your cooking, or your university studies and all the assignments that are due. It's just, those few hours every week where you can completely let loose, forget about all your worries. And of course, playing sport releases endorphins, your happy hormones. So that always is helpful.
100%. And speaking of exercise, I wanted to ask you about your training for running the London Marathon and how you decided to take on this endeavor, why, and how this kind of exercise regime has been influencing kind of your anxiety and kind of managing that.
Yeah. So the London Marathon, a bit of a crazy one. Um, Anyone that knows me knows that I am very impulsive, but I also always need a challenge. And it was at the end of second year of university, and I really just wanted to do something crazy. Um, it was one evening, and I had got a random email about signing up for the London Marathon. I've never run before. I think the furthest I've ever run was probably 1.5K at school. And I decided, you know what? There's no harm in applying. I had no idea. Like, it's super competitive to get a place. I decided to write an application for the National Autistic Society. Completely forgot about it. And 6 months later, I get a call saying, you've received a place to run the London Marathon in 2024. And, you know, I was completely ready for the challenge. Absolutely not ready at all. But it's something that has actually been such a great opportunity. I have loved, I'm what, 4 weeks into my training program now. I'm loving every minute of it. It's given me a focus, and I spoke about with anxiety, how I was playing netball. And I think having an outlet and running really has become my outlet. And it's something I absolutely love. I'm not a fast runner, I'm not a great runner, but it's something I really, really enjoy.
I think that's so powerful. And what I found really compelling about your running journey was this idea of I mean, you talk about being a sporty person, but with autism and with neurodiversity, like there are coordination problems that are associated with it.
Hmm.
And in my personal experience, I have dyspraxia, which is motor I can't speak motor coordination delay disability, and so I've always been kind of labeled as like the unsporty person, and that was something that I kind of took to and internalized as part of who I am for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
Until COVID when I started running as well. Just for myself. It wasn't long. Like you said, it wasn't fast or super like technical or anything. It was just for focus and mindfulness and just as a challenge. And I loved it. And I mean
Mhm.
I stopped doing it and I need to get back into it. But I think that kind of it links back to another one of your blogs where you talked about really just rising above the labels and the challenges and the kind of hurdles that are put in front of you by either society or by what people think or what you think of yourself. So, do you have any, because like you said, you only started training, but do you have any strategies that you're putting in place to stay on course and make sure that you kind of don't get demotivated or feel like the challenge is insurmountable or that you can't do it? Like, how are you going to stay on track?
Yeah, I think I'm taking it week by week, day by day. I think thinking about the bigger picture with anything in life, whilst it can be motivating, it can also be super overwhelming. I think the second, probably most important thing is not to compare yourself. Um, Having something like Strava, for example, which is an app where you can track your running progress, whilst it can be great for personal use, it can also be something that can feel quite demotivating when you're comparing yourself to all these people that are super fast runners that run great distances. And so it's important to remember not to compare yourself to others. For me, I try and ground myself to why I'm running the marathon. As much as it is for me, it's also for the greater good and the bigger cause of the National Autistic Society, and raising money for them. So, my aim, as much as I would love to run a fast time because I am a super competitive person, my aim is to raise the money that I need to raise and complete it. And I try and remind myself that and look at how far I've come just in the last, few months of beginning running and how much I am enjoying it and how much it is helping my mental health. And that has been really encouraging.
That is super inspiring. And linking to another aspect of like competition in your life, you're a medical student at the University College London, which is notoriously competitive, as is most medical schools. And I wanted to ask more about one, your reasons for going into medicine and whether it links to kind of your diagnosis and your personal circumstance, and also how you manage the whole competition aspect of it and the kind of difficulties, because like you said, there are kind of sensory difficulties that come with autism and the social difficulties, and that's kind of part of like clinical work. And so, can you please talk to us a little bit more about being a med student and having autism?
Yeah, of course. So to begin with, why I went into medicine. Now, for me, whenever I get this question, it's always a weird one because I would say it probably wasn't one specific moment in my life that made me go, right, I'm going to be a doctor. Um, but more just throughout my life, through family members, I kind of had been exposed to healthcare settings. Um, and so it was always an option. But then I went into some work experience. I did some volunteering at community shelters for disabilities. And when I did get my diagnosis, it kind of felt like the right track. Um, and for me, I was going into medicine for the clinical side of things, believe it or not. It can sound strange because being autistic, people do think, whilst we do have challenges communicating, I also think that autistic individuals have a huge sense of empathy. And like I said earlier, there is that need to socialize. with others. And I haven't actually done any clinical placements yet because they start next year. But I am really looking forward to it. There is a part of me that is quite nervous about having a full-on clinical role, speaking to patients on a daily basis. But I think the way I'm going to approach it is just being quite transparent. Um, I think being autistic, I want to be quite honest and upfront about that because it's the only way where you can really get the adjustments that you need. And whether that's maybe having reduced hours compared to other individuals, I'm not sure yet. But that's something I guess I'll have to navigate over the next few years. And then addressing competitiveness in the med school, I think it's something that is really prevalent. But when I was deciding on what university I wanted to go to, one of the reasons I picked UCL was because the way that the med school navigate, they're very much they want individuals to work together. They want our cohort to be close. And they're very good in that sense at emphasizing that. And so, whilst you do get a lot of competition, I think I am very lucky in terms of the friends that I have made are very much supportive. And so, yeah.
That's lovely. And it's really nice to know that institutions are also shifting towards being better at including people with diverse needs and experiences. And I feel very lucky that both of us get to be part of that community at UCL.
Mm.
So to wrap up, I want to ask you more about your blog. When you started your blog, you said that your main goals were to raise awareness about autism, to highlight the difference between male and female, and to provide individuals with some guidance and resources. Now, after more than 1 year of having your blog, do you feel like you've kind of reached the goals that you've set out to? Do you have new goals of where you want to take your blog further? What is next for you and your platform and the work that you're doing in autism awareness?
Yeah, so I think to begin with, I am very grateful for everyone that supported me on my journey, for everyone that's read a blog. Um, with me, there's always more. I always want to do more. I think there's so much more that I want to achieve. It would be my absolute dream to make this my career. Um, in terms of short-term goals though, because I don't want to jump too far ahead, uh, what's on the cards? Well, I have started public speaking, and so I've spoken to schools across the globe actually, which is pretty amazing about neurodiversity and bringing that into the curriculum in primary schools, secondary schools, and for teachers. And so I hopefully will be doing more work with that. And then this summer, my aim, I feel like if I put it out there, I will hold myself accountable. But there may be a book coming, hopefully, fingers crossed. Um, and so it's really just about, doing bigger and better things. I think when I think about behind the smiles, I always remind myself that it's not about me, it's about our community. And I feel like I represent a massive community of people that aren't fortunate enough who don't have the platform to speak out. And so I try and push myself as much as possible, whether that's a good thing or not.
That's amazing. And I think it's so incredible all the work that you've done. And I'm really excited to see where it goes and definitely can't wait to hear more from you. How can our listeners connect with you and follow your journey or get involved with your community?
Yeah, so I have a website, so that's behindthesmiles.co.uk. And then I'm also on social media, pretty much all platforms, and it's just Nidhi Sethi, just my name. So you can find me on there, and feel free to reach out.
Amazing. I will link everything below as per usual. And you already mentioned that you're very grateful for the people in your life and your journey, but I always end my podcast with a theme of gratitude. So can you give us another thing that you're grateful for today?
Actually, to you, I'm very grateful to you. I think what you're doing is so amazing, giving females the opportunity to speak out and share their stories. And so, yeah, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. You really are an empowering and inspiring woman, and it was a privilege to speak to you today. Thank you for listening to the Empower Sounds podcast. If you like the show, please rate and review it and follow the podcast Instagram at Empower Sounds to let me know what you want to hear. I will see you next week.